Hey everybody, welcome to Far Realms Radio, our podcast of many things.
I'm Justin.
And I'm Skylar.
And today we're talking about session zeros.
This is, in fact, our session zero.
Yeah, so bear with us.
So, you and I come from different backgrounds about D&D, and they're similar, but I think that maybe you can tell me a little bit about, in your mind, what a session zero is in our session zero here for this, and why you think that way.
For me, like a session zero, and remember, big disclaimer here, everything is dependent on the table that you're playing at, right? And the people that you're playing with. Like, playing with strangers at a shop or a convention is going to be really different than playing a home game with people whose gaming preferences you know, or you have good rapport with,
right?
Or you know how far you can push the lines in regards to like role play or just like making jokes. So
anytime we're talking generalization, yeah,
totally. So always that disclaimer. It's always going to depend on your table. But for me, like, I think as a game master, like as a player, you probably don't think about session zero much, except like, oh, are we actually playing? Like, I got to make a character, right? All right, cool. That's mostly the players. Like, I'm making a character. That's my goal. What I think as a GM, it's really, you're going to try to gather information from your players. You know, like, you got to have some options of like different premises for your campaign. And then usually after you gather that information, you kind of see what people are interested in, you can pitch that campaign. Now, if you're already running a campaign with friends, you're almost always talking about, oh, hey, in the next campaign or in a future campaign, what if we did this? Or what if we went to space?
My character really wants to do this.
Exactly, right? You always talk about that with a group that you know. So you kind of have an idea, like maybe Steve likes combat, but George only cares about talking to NPCs. Right? Like, it's going to be different. And if you're in a group where you know those people, it's a lot easier because you already know what they're not going to like. So it helps you narrow it down. At least for me. And then, you know, once you have that idea and you pitch it, you can kind of get your players to buy into that campaign, make your characters, and get going.
So I didn't ever know what a session zero was for a long time. It wasn't part of gaming when I started gaming. Where did you learn about it? Like because I definitely remember when I learned about it and where I was like, oh, that's a thing. But like, where was the first time you encountered it?
So we really didn't do a session zero because we couldn't get together that much. You had to get your mom's, drive to your friend's house across town. So, like, we would play for, 16 hours with a video game break in the middle. And your characters would die, so you would roll new ones. And session zero, I think, really consisted of the 10 minutes before we played where my buddy would explain, oh, hey, this is the campaign that I've spent a month designing and creating this map for. Here's what the setting is. Make characters, let's go. And so there wasn't much of a session zero. But I think it's a really good idea because we've all played in campaigns that peter out after like 2 sessions and no one's happy, or like the DM's very happy.
Or even one.
Yeah. Or everyone's just kind of smiling and nodding and just happy to be playing D&D even though it's really not their cup of tea.
Awkward.
Yeah. But for you, what's a session zero for you? How did you like come about it? Because
I don't remember reading anything about it in 2nd edition, which is where I got involved. And it was definitely a 3rd edition thing. It may even be 3.5. It was after 3rd edition came out. Maybe I think there was a little bit in the DMG, if I'm remembering correctly. And that's not a guarantee. And but we had backed into it at that point because we had the same group of friends. Like when I was a kid, it was all of us playing D&D. And as teenagers, like 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And we would play the character that we wanted to play, which wasn't always what the other person wanted to play. We weren't always there for the same reasons.
I have a samurai in your Western medieval history campaign. Too bad.
Except we were teenagers, so it's like, I'm going to play a half-vampire, dark version of Dracula's son, and that guy's playing I'm playing a cleric whose name is Galvatron, like the Transformer. Clearly. And these two do not, easily coexist. So, after having conflict over, but we were still going to play,
So fun.
We'd have conflict and we'd try to give each other what we wanted, and so wanted to run this particular thing, and such and such wanted to fight that monster, and we would argue about it and what each character motivation was. Enough times that when we would roll up new characters, you'd be like, all right, let's have we called it a character making session.
Yeah, exactly. That's what
Which is basically a session zero, where we would sit down and we'd be like, I want to make a blank. And Mike would be like, I want to make a blah. And I'd be like, well, okay, so if I'm going to play some dragoon jumping lance type character and you're going to play thief, assassin, ninja, in what world can these two coexist?
Yeah, exactly. I think 3.5 pushed a lot more planning your character in advance, because if you wanted to get into that crazy prestige class, you had to plan each level, right? So it was less of learning your character and who they were by playing and leveling up with maybe roleplay reasons, and more, I think, 3.5 with the way the classes were structured. You have this long-term goal of who you kind of want the character to become, and you're trying to fit that into a campaign more frequently. And I think Session Zero is just a name we've given in the online zeitgeist to this idea of a character planning session, right, or a session where we get the players to buy into the campaign.
Yeah, and talk about it. I mean, I think for me back then it was like, well, part of it was practical, and this may still be true, I guess, considering the distribution model of the game is, hey, you go to the store, you buy some books, you bring it home, you play, and we were teenagers, so we didn't have a lot of money, and we were like, all right, none of us have jobs, and the game store didn't have a comprehensive D&D selection. It was like a lot of model figurines and comic books and magic cards and
whatever the adults thought the kids liked.
Right, plus a shelf that was sparse and had maybe 3 books and then 1 adventure.
And one of them was the past edition that no one's playing.
Right. And so, we'd pool our money and go and get that book, whatever we could. So part of it was we have this adventure we want to run because it's the adventure we have, but the characters start at 5th level, but we've never made characters starting at 5th level. What about the discrepancy in stuff? How do we want to handle it? It was let's talk about the game we want to play, which I'm only now, as I'm thinking about it and talking about it out loud, doesn't really happen very much with other kinds of tabletop games.
It really doesn't. You don't sit down to Cthulhu and be like, what kind of game are we playing?
Well, yeah, even the role-playing games.
Going in, right. You know what you're getting into.
You go to play a Warhammer game, as you and I both have done, and it's like, all right, you're going to do this.
And I need a ruler.
It's just, and it's just cut out for this particular kind of...
Where's that red ruler?
But I think what's weird about it is even in other systems like GURPS, let's say, or Fate, or one of the really generic, flexible systems.
Yeah.
This kind of session zero happens more readily when people are making characters. I sometimes wonder about the difference between D&D's hey, let's do a character making session zero where we can have some sense of what we're going to do, and the other ones where it's kind of baked into the building of
how you
character.
set up the game, maybe,
right.
And his character is setting up the game. There's a lot of games. I mean, any video game. One of the first things you get dropped into is a character creation screen. I don't know about you, but I've spent hour or 2 hours in a character creation screen adjusting every detail, because sometimes you can't change it later, and then you're like, oh, I hate this person's hair. And then I get into the game, play it for 30 minutes, go, this is shit, and never play it again.
I mean, that basically sounds like the whole marketing shtick for The Sims.
Yeah, I mean, it's close.
Okay, this, I think, sort of covers the why, and we've talked a little bit about what you get out of it. What else?
What's the ultimate goal of a session zero for you? For me, it's to set up a campaign that I want to run, because I'm the one investing most of the time and energy into running it, that I can run, that's within my capabilities as a DM, and that the players actually like and will buy into. At least I want at least 2 of them to buy into it. At least 2. If you don't get at least 2, you're screwed.
I think as a DM, my want out of a session zero is different than as a player. And as a DM, I want 2 things. I want to know what the players want, and if I can provide the tone that they want while still getting what I want out of it. And I'm a pretty easy DM, so I'm like, let's run through a published adventure because it's a common reference point. This is the adventure we're going to run. This is the tone that it has. This is the kind of character that would be appropriate, blah, 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 blah. As a player, what I want out of a session zero is my character okay? I have this idea, and I have questions I want to answer.
Can I get it approved? Can I get your stamp of approval?
And I want to, and maybe also to learn about hooks in the world and this in the game we have, whatever that version of that is, that make it easy to tie into. Not just because having run games, I'm like, let's make the DM's job easier, but also because it's part of how I get.
It also get into character. I think.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm big on
fulfillment.
It's not the GM's job to create the buy-in for you. I mean,
I totally agree. You said that very succinctly earlier, and I was like, yeah, it's
totally
not
their job to give you a reason to be an adventurer. That's not their. I mean, they should give you something that you can work with. You know,
Sure,
like
pick from the
something. Like you can't just sit there and be like, all right, because like that's the GM's job. That's why you're doing it. Like otherwise, you might as well go play a GM-less game. But I think the first thing when you're doing a session 0 that you need to really establish is scheduling, commitments, and campaign length.
Yeah.
Because everything depends on your table, right? And if you're not getting together, you can't. That table doesn't mean shit. So I think the first thing you should always kind of establish, because this kind of controls what you can and can't do as a DM, right? Like, let's say like a frequent game, like once a week, right? Every week. Versus an infrequent game, like once a month. The things you can do in those games changes, right? Like, you're playing 4 times as much if you're playing every week.
And also session length.
Totally, that too. Like, I think that plays into the scheduling commitment, right? What can your players do? Like, when we were younger, I'd play for 8 hours straight, take a break, and play another 8 hours.
All night long!
Now, I get to 4 or 5 hours, and I'm like, oh man, I'm tired, and I'm done. So I think campaign, like scheduling commitments are super important. And then infrequent versus frequent is always something to consider, right? Because if you're doing really complex plot twists or story arcs or really detailed world building, that's hard to do with infrequent games. Because we've all had, like, no one remembers who that NPC is. Maybe you don't. The players hardly remember what happened last session because it was a month ago and 2 of them missed it. So I think frequent and infrequent games, like, is important. Like, if it's an infrequent game, in-game time becomes way more valuable. So you need to keep the pace up so things are happening. Right? Like, we've ran an Out of the Abyss campaign together before. And I think we didn't break out of jail for 4 sessions.
Yeah, oh my god.
Can you imagine if we were spreading that game out more infrequently, how frustrating that would be? It'd be like, it's been 4 months and we haven't got out of the jail.
We're still in prison.
We're still in prison at the start of the campaign.
I'm tired of this, I'm done.
I have no player agency at this point in the campaign, and that's a campaign that fizzles out. Because maybe Out of the Abyss wasn't a good choice, or maybe how they're running it for a really infrequent schedule of games.
So I think that one of the other things that is important to talk about is, and you talked about it, you brought it up just now, campaign length. Like, how do you qualify how long it's going to be? And one of the interesting, this actually I think is a disconnect, or maybe it's targeted, I should say, at experienced players, but to a new player. It doesn't necessarily, or even new to the game. And we usually talk about in the game as in D&D, like, oh, well, this game is going to last for 15 levels.
Which they don't know, they just signed a contract for 3 years of their life and blood.
However long that means, right? And if you follow, like, the Pathfinder adventure paths where they're doing, like,
I know it, and you know it.
I know.
They don't know
so,
it.
like, Pathfinder and Paizo, they put out these great adventure paths once a month, They have other adventures, too. But let's say you're a subscriber, as I have been for many, many of them. And you're like, let's do Rise of the Rune Lords.
You always have one to
Legacy
do.
of Fire. You have one a month. But the thing is, those 6 adventures, it takes about 1.5 to 2 years to get through, just to get through them. In the meanwhile, you've stacked up a whole 2-3 other adventure paths to do, but being able to say, and each of those takes you to like 15 or 18 or somewhere up there. And D&D, I think, is exactly the same in this regard, right? It's, you sign up for Storm Giant's Thunder, I think it is, right? And it takes you also to 15, and you're going to be like, all right, so we're going to be doing this for a while.
We're invested. Yeah. And I think that's character level based is one that is a really accessible way of explaining to a player, because if you've played, you have an idea of how long it takes you to get to that level. You have an idea, but that's something that I couldn't give you a formula for. It's just something from playing for 20 years that I kind of know how long it's going to take me to get to 15th level. It's a little different in each edition, but once you kind of know the GM and you know the pace of the game, you can kind of estimate. Plus, we all know you never get especially if you run games, you never get as far as you think.
No.
So, and the nice thing is adventures are usually organized, or entire campaigns are organized by like 1st to 15th level. Like, it'll say it in the subtitle almost. So I think that's like one of the best. But if you're homebrewing, which surprisingly, the majority of players still just homebrew their own worlds.
Bless them.
I'm lazy, and I homebrew a world and plop adventures in it.
Bless them.
I don't have time for that. Yeah. But I think if you're doing it plot-based, right? So you can do a plot-based one, right? Like, if, for example, in the pirate campaign I'm running right now, it's clearly revolving around what happens with the Pirate King. Do you defeat him? Does he take over the part of the world he's going for? So you can do a plot-based one, right? Where it's like the campaign ends when this happens, when you reach this goal. Right. And you can set that goal, or you can have it be like a goal the players can work towards incrementally. It just kind of depends on how, what the main theme of your campaign is. If it's more plot-based, I assume you have an idea of what your plot is. Either way, I think with those approaches, you really need to start with the end in mind and work backwards.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's worthwhile talking about that with the players, too. To sit down in a session 0 and be like, here's where this story goes. So
like a movie trailer,
right?
Spoiler free.
Okay, so and to use your pirate game as an example. All right, there's a pirate king. This story goes toward you're going to encounter a variety of pirate-based shenanigans. There's going to be a conflict at some point between the 7-nation army that's fighting him and the pirate king and the players, and also whatever the player motivations are. Being able to give them hooks at that time is, I think, it's key, and also makes it actually easier for the DM, right? If you're running the game and you let them cleanly into some of where the story goes, then they'll drive it very often, and you don't have to.
That's my goal. I don't want to have to drive that story around. At least in that campaign, it's very sandboxy.
Right.
I want you guys to drive the ship, literally drive the ship around.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, and that makes it far less work for the DM.
Totally.
Which makes it more easy to have.
And if you want the least amount of work, you can always take the approach, which I think most of us took when we were younger, where it was essentially just an endless campaign with a Monster of the Week approach. There weren't tons of complex plot lines. We just wanted to level up, get cool shit, and fight monsters.
There was one time that we opened the monster manual to A.
Oh, you did the A through Z?
We did. We managed not to die, which was impressive, considering we were 14, 15, and 16. And it was second edition, so it wasn't balanced. But we followed all the rules. Like, okay, this creature comes in however many, roll the dice for how many, in what habitat. That means we're in a swamp. All right, so now we're in a swamp, and we managed to beat it. So now it has this much treasure. Roll on the table. Where's that going to be in a swamp?
Right.
It leads to a very disjointed,
it's fun, though.
Very entertaining adventure. I would recommend it once.
Yeah. I think the other thing, before you even get to like character creation, setting is important. And before you even get to setting, I think something that a lot of people skip over, just like the scheduling, right? Because you got to think about the real world stuff with a session 0 a lot of the time. I think house table rules is a really good thing. Just like in general in-game rules that you're going to run for your house, whether it's like drop dice policies, certain rules about like role playing or like a turn timer. Everyone has their things, if you drop a dice it doesn't count, or maybe it does, or unannounced dice rolls, like, hey, you can only roll if I say you can roll for something, like that dice doesn't count.
Some people care really a lot about
right? Some people really care about that stuff. Like, there's a lot of things to consider there, like food and drink. Like, some players, alcohol at the table can be an issue. We're drinking right now, and we clearly encourage that.
There was one time I was playing in college, and I was with a bunch of and I went to Bard College, basically.
Yes, he actually is a bard. Ha! He actually went to Bard College.
So there's like a bunch of actors who are playing D&D, which is really fun, as now is in the zeitgeist with Critical Role and all this.
Of course.
But in one of their dorms, and we're all playing D&D, and we invite one of the other guys, and we were all super nerdy, and we'd all played D&D before, and none of, we were just like super nerdy kids. And one guy shows up, and he brings a 6-pack of beer. And we all were like, oh, no! You can't do that! It's not okay at the table! Oh, no!
Oh, whoa.
We gave him total stink eye, and he did not come back.
That's what I would have said in high school, too. Like, we're like, whoa, this is good, wholesome fun here. It's like that old ad with the kid in the overalls, and he's like, I got D&D, I don't need to, like, loiter outside like a punk. I will say I was very, very pleased when Critical Role recreated that ad with Matthew Mercer and the group, like, as the people in the ad. It was quite great.
Yeah. But I think it's actually definitely worth talking about. And what I would come later to realize, it actually took until I went to conventions to realize this. And that just tells you some of how dense I am. That beer and pretzel style gaming is a long and storied tradition, not only just for like tabletop wargaming, but for D&D and others too.
I mean, it breaks that role play nice for a lot of people. As long as people are comfortable with alcohol at the table, because some people it's going to be a big no-no. You know, everyone's got their own deals. I'm very much like, do your own thing. I'm not your dad.
Well, I mean, that's part of the game too, right? Like, at its very core, it's like, hey, you be the character you want to be. Yeah. Show up at the table and do what you want. Get what fun you want out of it. Oh, I want crunch. Oh, I want role play. Oh, I want whatever the different players want. And also, don't shit on somebody else.
Yeah. And once again, it depends how well you know your group. Like, if you already know your group pretty well, you already know these things. You're not going to be talking about this. It's just assumed.
Well, I think the other part of it is, you know, and that's really about logistics. Like, that touches a little bit on what are we here to do. One of the things that I really is really important for me, I think, about a session zero is what I call setting the container. And, you know, you call it like psychological safety, and it is that. But I think it's a little more than that, too. There's like okay, we're going to imagine together. We're going to play a game together. We're going to spend hours in each other's time. We have to probably not hate each other's company, and hopefully nobody smells real bad, you know?
There's always one guy.
Yeah, hopefully not. How do you tell that person?
Oh, it's the hardest thing.
Just like, I'm going to buy you some deodorant.
Put deodorant in their backpack and just never say anything.
But setting the container, I think, so part of it is, you know, can we co-imagine, but also, and this is, I think, part of the DM's role too, is to set the tone and maintain what that cohesive tone looks like. So, you know, every DM has their own way of running a game, and every table feels different. But being able to draw sort of a boundary around what the idea of the game is and say, in this steampunk game, here are the things that you can do. Plus also, here are the things that your character can do separate. You know, and a good example might be, here are some tokens that you can spend, like a hero point, or we're going to use plot twist cards to empower the player to do this particular kind of thing. And here's what they can and cannot do. Because otherwise, people, I think, often get stuck in the place of either I'm going to try anything off the wall, or I don't know what the bounds are, so I'm not going to try.
Especially new players. Like, you know, new players, and it's like the best part about having a new player is they all have this moment where they realize, oh my God, I can do anything. Like, they have this moment where they're like, oh, I'm not bound to these restrictions like in computer RPGs or video games, or I can just try it and see if it works. And it's really cool to see, because it's so different than most games anyone else has ever played. Now, maybe they played a lot of tabletops or a lot of role-playing, or they're out LARPing, yeah, sure. But it's a really magical moment. And that's always the coolest part as a GM, is to witness a new player have that moment of like, oh my God, I can do anything.
You can see it in their eyes.
Yeah, and they're like, you see these wheels click because they pause for a second, and they're like, oh, cool.
Then usually they're like, I'm going to try
they're really excited for that next
I'm going to try to steal that guy's pouch.
Yeah, and then they kind of, it devolves into their first murder hobo experience. But it's kind of unavoidable. The game kind of like really puts you on rails towards that, you know.
I think the other part of it is that they can see what I guess this is what you just talked about, the possibilities of it are, but also that they see that they have the power to
player agency
themselves. Yeah, right.
Kind of. I think that's an important part. I think the one thing to be careful with session zeros is it doesn't just become this like big group checklist that you go through. You know, I think it's better if it's more organic. If the atmosphere is like you're chilling, you're having a couple drinks, maybe you're eating dinner, and just like paying attention to what people say and what they like about certain things, rather than like, all right, I got this checklist, let's talk about how we're going to go through experience. Like, clearly you need to talk about it at some point. Like, I'm a big fan of milestone experience, because then you get less murder hoboing, right? You're like, yeah, you could kill that guy, but you're probably not going to gain anything, and now you just look like a dick.
Right.
You know? So, little things like that I think are important. But I think it's also important to not it shouldn't feel like an interview or a test, you know? Because people are good at knowing what they like, but they're bad at predicting what they're going to like in the future. They don't know what they want.
I think that's a good insight, you know, and I have definitely been a part of sessions and inadvertently run sessions too, where it was more pressure than the player, one or more of them, wanted. And I realized after the fact and was like,
they don't like that much spotlight time.
That's interesting. But I think that's part of it is like being able to sense out, like, what is it you're in this for? You know, why are you playing this game? Because it's not just a normal board game.
Totally.
You know, it's not just like playing pretend either, or
it comes
whatever.
Back to knowing your players and knowing what they're playing for and how they're going to express that in the game.
Is it time for tavern talk?
I think we should stop into that tavern over there. I'm a little thirsty.
I think I could use a little brew.
There's always a tavern. Welcome to Tavern Talk, the part of the show where we review a brew and we toast to you, our glorious listeners.
This week, we're going to be reviewing Delirium Tremens, a lovely golden Belgian ale.
But be careful, it has a higher alcohol percent than you might realize.
Like most Belgians, it is a lovely kick in the face.
But it's super drinkable.
I think as a rating, I would give it maybe an 8.5 out of 10.
I'd probably give it a 9. That little pink elephant he's my buddy.
It's pretty good. One of the things I like about it is it's got a really malty flavor. It's nice and got a good mouthfeel.
But it's not heavy.
But it's not very heavy. One of the things I don't like about it is that as far as Belgians go, it's not my favorite.
Really? What's
Yeah.
your favorite?
Golden Draak.
Okay.
We'll do that one time.
That's a valid
Golden Dragon.
valid reason. Right? We'll have to.
What's the trivia you know about Delirium Tremens?
So Delirium Tremens actually is referring, the phrase refers to the alcohol withdrawals.
Ooh.
And the trembling, the shaking, and the delirium, the hallucinations that people experience. Hence the little pink elephant on the can. It's like that scene in Dumbo, the original animated one, where he like starts
Pink
hallucinating because he's all drunk and withdrawed.
Pink elephants.
Yeah, pink elephants, exactly.
Pink elephants.
Speaking of pink elephants, well, I guess there's not any in the Monster Manual, but there are elephants, and that leads into our promo that we're offering.
That's right. For the first 8 weeks of the show, we're doing a promo, a giveaway, a raffle for all of you listeners.
What you'll get is the Holy Trinity of D&D, the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual.
The core rulebook.
The core rulebooks. And hey, maybe you have these, but you know what? They make great gifts. Maybe you have a new player who doesn't have one.
Such good gifts.
It's such an awesome thing to be able to give to new players, especially when you got it for free from us.
Totally. The Monster Manual in particular is so good for this. Like, here's a book of all the cool monsters. Have fun looking through
That
it.
was always my favorite one.
So the way it works is if you share our show via social media, you can @Far Realms Radio on Twitter, @Far Realms Radio on Instagram. You can email us and tell us about how you shared your show. You can show us a picture about how you shared our show.
Some proof that you shared the show.
Anything
It could
like
be
that.
like a screenshot of a test message with a friend where you're like, hey, check out this dope podcast.
We will add you to our raffle, and then after 8 weeks, we will pull the winner.
We'll let you know the specific date once we have it set in a future episode.
Good luck.
And now, back to the show. I think another thing that you need to establish, especially when you don't know people, are boundaries. And you talked about this earlier. What was the phrase that you used? The container?
Container.
The container, right? And for me, I call these role-playing safety rules, right?
Yeah.
So, of course, when I first saw that, I laughed. And then I clicked and read the article and realized, wow, I'm an asshole. So, and I was reading about, the most common strategy, if you've been to a convention, you've probably seen this. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. What are these cards for? It's an index card with a giant X on it.
Huh.
And there's no words on it. There's nothing else. It's just a giant X. It's red or black usually. And what this does is it's a card you hold up when you're getting to subject matter that you're not comfortable talking about, or you don't want to role play through, or for whatever reason. It's some kind of personal, ethical, political thing. For example, in my games, I don't allow sexual violence. It's not something that it needs to happen at the table. I'm just not cool with it. And people may have histories with that. That's just a personal thing. So, things like that, you never know, maybe that guy's mom died and he doesn't want to go explore the funeral home in the game because his mom just passed away. Maybe you don't know that.
Right.
And if he brings it up, it's one, he's doing it in front of a group of people he may not be comfortable doing that in front of, and it ruins the verisimilitude of the game and the pacing, and now everyone's not, it's a buzzkill.
Now everybody feels bad because we inadvertently stepped on John's toes. And
Exactly.
the
We're
game's
and now
dead
the game's
now.
dead. The game is dead in the water. However, if John has that card he can hold up and the DM can see this is a subject that he needs to veer away from, you can gracefully do some hand waving, maybe even literally like I'm doing right now, and wave things away from that, but anyways, this happens outside, and your attention is drawn there.
I think one of the best tools I've heard for this, it might have come from, I think it was Robin Laws who wrote about this, is called Lines and Veils. And I think that this is a totally invaluable tool. It's not right for every session zero. It is right to talk about at every table.
Well, at a session zero, you might actually talk about this.
You might be explicit.
Directly,
You might be
yeah.
explicit. I think it's worth being explicit about lines and veils with every table at some point, and it's really up to, I think, the DM to bring it up, or somebody else if the DM doesn't. Like it's the table needs to talk about it at some point, and it's part of it's. Maybe I'll say it's entirely the tone and feel, because this is all about the feel of it. And it's like with a board game, you don't have to worry about this because the constraints of the game are pretty clearly defined. Like, oh, I don't want to play Nemesis, the board game, where you're a space soldier trying to escape aliens, like Alien the movie, because I hate horror. Okay, fine. That's like a really clear thing. But lines and veils are ways that players can talk about things that they're okay with and things that they're not okay with and things that they're okay with but not directly. So, for example, a veil might be, like in Hollywood, the classic adage is you can never kill a puppy on screen, or any pet. No animals can have explicit violence in Hollywood film because it is the fastest way to turn your audience off.
But if you want someone to hate a character,
they will hate that character.
Kick the dog technique.
Guaranteed that if you are violent toward a pet or an animal, the audience will feel animosity toward that
My
character.
favorite example of that is American Psycho, where he literally murders a homeless person and you don't care, and then he kicks a dog. It doesn't show it. It pans away, but you hear the yelp, and all of a sudden everyone hates this guy. Right. He just murders someone. No one cares. He kicks that little dog, though, and all of a sudden Patrick Bateman is evil.
And there's a lot of better writing than I can talk about here about why that is. But the nature of it basically boils down to there are things that players are okay with happening, and there are things that they're not okay with happening. But of the things they're okay with, there's a large subset that can happen, quote-unquote, off-screen. That's the veil. So, in film, for instance, the cardinal rule is, like you just talked about, you can kick or hurt or any kind of animal off screen and the audience will be okay. But if you show that animal being killed on screen, they'll check out. Not only will they hate the character, but there's a non-trivial number of them that will be like, I'm going to turn this off now, or I'm going to get up and leave the theater because I am not here to watch puppies die. I'm not into it. It's like not
the first time I saw the John Wick, I was like, whoa. Yeah. This is a little much. I don't need that.
That was controversial for that reason because they killed the dog on camera.
On camera.
Like, holy smokes.
I know.
That's ballsy. So a veil would be, you can do that kind of thing, but it can't happen on camera. Which means that in the case of it happens over there. The dog got killed before we got there, or after we left the scene, or we know it happened and it can happen in the story, but we can't ever be a part of it or witness it or talk about it.
It can't be happen on screen. And for some people, they might be okay with that, and others are like, no, just expunge it completely. I don't want that anywhere near my game.
A line is a more strict contract. A line would be something,
we don't do this.
We don't do this. This doesn't exist in our story. So, for instance, sexual violence.
That's something that I have a line
very
there.
Excellent line. Like that's just not. Nope. It's our fantasy escapist world. So, in my fantasy escapist world, what doesn't happen? Any of that.
Yeah.
Because obviously this is escapist fantasy, and these are the kinds of things that we all need to be able to have with each other.
Exactly. And for some people, that might be like slavery or some other personal issue.
Or like. It could be physical violence from a parent.
It could be genocide.
Or it could be genocide. Or it could be racism. Or it could be... it's different for every different kind of,
Any group in your table, it's going to depend on their experiences as people and why are they playing this game. So, after you go over, role-playing safety rules, and that may be a conversation with your group. It may not even be something you have to talk about.
I explicitly recommend it at some point.
At some point, I agree. Especially if there's someone you haven't played with before, let them know. And I think one of the most important things is to let them know if at any point in this game something comes up that you were uncomfortable with, that you don't like, communicate that to me.
Talk about
tell the group, whatever you're most comfortable with communicating it, let me know. Because that's something,
whatever.
At least as a game master, I want to address that. I want to make your experience fun. I don't want you to feel like you can't say, hey, I don't like this part of the experience that we're having. You gotta let them know though that they can tell you that. Because a new player doesn't know that they can say that to a GM and have it matter.
And there are power dynamics
because
too,
they may
right?
feel, well, there's the GM power. New players see the GM as this authority force, where you and I have played for a long time. We've been players, we've been GMs. So for us, it's more of like, oh, you're trying to keep shit together behind that screen, huh? Oh, man.
Okay.
Too bad we zagged left.
You guys have a lot going on right now in your characters. I'm going to see if I can keep up.
Yeah, exactly. You know the burden of running the game. So a new player may not know that. So it's good to let them know, like, hey, if something comes up, tell me. Like, maybe you're not using cards. That's fine. Like, and sometimes, as a GM, it's nice. Players will tell other players what they're not okay with.
Oh, yeah.
And we've seen this at tables, and sometimes it works out well, and you never have to deal with it again. Sometimes, you know, if there are people that don't know each other that well, and they don't know where those boundaries are, you know, it can cause a problem, and it can create a little weird vibe at the table. So I think it's something good, especially with new people, to break that ice and just be like, hey, is there anything that you're just really not cool with? Because I want you to feel comfortable at our table. Yeah. Especially when people who don't role play maybe don't understand this as much. Like, once you get into, like, role playing a little bit more and you're more comfortable with it, like, some players are not okay with character versus character conflict.
Yes, a large number.
I personally love it, but I always want to make sure that the player knows that, like, that it's our characters.
Right.
Like, I can think of it, at least one of the games we're playing right now, I love that my nefarious little goblin and this paladin, that the paladin hates him. I love it. Yes. I want to foster that. It creates a good group. Like, you know, it works. And clearly the player's an experienced player. He knows that, like, I don't actually dislike him. It's just that our characters are totally misaligned.
And yet there are some friends I have that I still play with today who really feel very strongly that character-on-character conflict
is not okay.
Not part of this game. What's different and special about this game, and it's different for every player, but in this case, and I think there are a lot of people who are like this, are like, what's different and special about this game is that we all get to play whatever character we want, co-op, in the world we want, which no video game nor any board game today can do.
Totally. Not at that level. No way. And I think that's why establishing is something you may want to talk about as we get into establishing your game rules and your table play style is player versus player stuff okay? How is that handled? Is it a dice roll?
What does it look like?
How do you make it fun? Can you steal from your other players? Because
especially from other players who aren't involved in it, you know?
Clearly, right? I remember, I'm sure you've had this experience playing when we were younger. I would have two best friends who all the time would try to murder each other. They would straight up, like, one of them would win a magic item, and the other one would be like, no, I want that magic item. I draw my sword, and I attack him. And the other player's like, well, I cast Fireball. And the other player's like, well, you don't have time to do that because I just drew my sword and attacked you. So you get into this whole, you know, and then you're like, oh, God, do I have them both roll for this?
Now I'm your friend adjudicating consequences for
and so,
who
you know,
can
you're like,
fight
so,
the other.
are you sure you really want to do that? Oh, my God, look at that. There's another chest with more magic items around the corner. Oh, my God.
Welcome to Power.
Or, you know, like, oh, orcs attack you. Fuck you. Like, you know, you always have that option, too. But I think, you know, when you're looking at that stuff, like, there's a couple that for me I think are the most important. They would be, at least in terms of, you gotta establish your game rules, right? Like, after you establish house and table rules, which I think should come first, then you can go into, like, all right, how are we going to establish our game rules and our table play style, right? Like, play style, if you're with a group, they probably know your play style already. It might be a little more hack and slash. You may lean a little bit more into the immersive storytelling. It might be a mix of both. I personally like to try to get a nice 50-50 split of tactical combat and role-playing. But I think for game rules, at least for me, the ones that I think matter the most to establish with your players, like, because remember, managing player expectations is literally half the battle of a session zero. That's why you're doing it. Experience and level ups. Are you doing milestone experience? Or level up? Are you doing experience as it's written, raw in the rules? That's the phrase we use now, by the way. Raw. Rules as written.
Or RAI, rules as interpreted.
Oh. So, PC deaths are another one that's really important. Do you allow resurrection? Do you have to roll a new character?
This is all setting expectations.
Do you allow, like, lingering, like, can that player be a ghost version of their character, like the lingering soul class we've seen in Homebrew? Which
what should they expect?
Yeah, right? Like, how, you know, you want to talk about that with your players, because I don't mind my PCs dying as long as they can do something cool on their way out. Other players, especially new players who haven't played back in the day, they're very story and narrative focused, right? Can you imagine if Critical Role had one of their main characters just fucking die and not come back?
Yeah, sorry, you fell into a
People
trap.
would be so
A
sad.
pit trap, and it was just the entrance is right inside the door of the dungeon.
Right.
And it got a critical on you and you died.
And you and I would love that, because that's how D&D goes sometimes.
I know, but come on, like it would be so anticlimactic.
It'd be a terrible narrative.
Yeah.
It'd be terrible. But for me, that's kind of the charm of D&D, is that sometimes that happens, just like real life. Like, that's part of the great part of the game. The other thing I think is, at least for me personally, is crit and fumbles. I love homebrew crit and fumble rules, even if it's just a chart that doesn't have any mechanical effect and just gives you flavor as a DM. Like, you roll that D100 and you're like, oh, you slit his throat and blood pours out of his jugular. You know, like something flavor even. Just like we use sometimes a crit deck and a fumble deck. I used to personally roll on crit and fumble tables. I would have tables and players would roll on that. And clearly, just like the free parking space of Monopoly, it changes the math of the game, you know, but it's fun, and I like doing it. So that's something that, like, I like to give people a head up, though. Like, hey, in my game, if you fumble, something bad might happen to you.
Yeah, you say this, but just because I feel like I need to call you out here, you also take out all of the life-threatening everything from the crit and fumble deck.
Yes, well, those are not meant for the levels we're at yet.
Yeah, you say that.
They're level sorted.
I'm gonna do a meat grinder, but I'm not.
I'm only this level 10 card of death. Hey, with the... Okay, you say that, but with the low-level cards I've been using, one of our players in the first round of combat shot an arrow, had it reflect back into his own face, and killed him.
I know.
In one shot.
Totally true.
And that was with the basic level danger cards.
I think that this is exactly this is like an optional thing that sometimes I've talked about it at session 0, but isn't always appropriate depending on your players, as always. Which is, what is the role, if you have new players, it's definitely worth talking about this. What is the role of the dice? Pun intended.
Oh man, that's a
whole
episode
matter?
in itself.
Why do we roll the dice? And, you know, for now, I think we can say, well, it's an abstraction on top of a very complicated scenario. Did you succeed at this very complicated scenario? Narrate as much detail as you want, which is why a lot of DMs will be like, if you give a good narration, I'll give you advantage or a bonus or whatever.
Inspiration that nobody uses.
Right. I mean, God, I really want to like. I want to like inspiration. I really want to like
tried
inspiration.
so hard, but I hate it as shit.
What else do you want to cover for a session 0?
We touched on this earlier, but it's different than setting. I think it's really important to differentiate your campaign flavor / genre / mood / whatever from your setting. They're different things, right? So you may be pitching these to your players. Is it high fantasy? Is it dark fantasy? Is it sci-fi, low magic, modern, post-apocalyptic? Like, when you're pitching these kind of campaign ideas to your players, those are probably that's probably the language you're going to use, right? Because they know what that means. Like, if I say steampunk, you're like, ooh, kind of like Eberron. Like, you have an idea of what that means.
So are you saying, like, this is my setting. Let's say I'm going to play in Forgotten Realms, the default setting, but it's going to have a steampunk
Exactly.
theme.
And so maybe you say to your players, like, hey, like, as you're in the session 0, what do you guys think of Forgotten Realms with a steampunk Eberron bent to it? Would you guys want to play in a campaign like that? Or, and you can make it more plot-based, but I think just even dropping that and seeing who picks up on that and thinks it's fun or cool, you can kind of get an idea, and you got to be flexible. You're going to have to throw out a couple ideas.
This is where an Appendix N, I think, is really crucial, right? You know, where you can say, here is the list of reference and source material that, as the DM, I use to envision this setting and also the tone.
Totally. I think that comes into what material you're going to allow and getting into all of that. But I think before you even get to getting to those specifics is, what of these premises of me throwing out do people react the most to? Right? Because if you say, hey, low magic D&D, I'm like, yeah, cool, no, I'll pass. I think almost every single core class uses a spell in some way, and the monk is also pretty much just using spells and calling them abilities. So, right, like there's more classes that cast spells than there are classes that do not.
I mean, D&D is very much high fantasy.
I mean, yeah, you can run it, but like me personally, I don't want to play in a low magic, like low fantasy setting. I'll play in a dark fantasy setting.
Only if it's got the same kind of crunch and power awesomeness, because I want my character to feel like a badass.
Well, here's the thing. I will switch to a different gamer system if I want low magic. There's plenty of other systems that do low magic, like D20 Modern, better than Dungeons & Dragons does.
I really like D20 Modern for the record. I think it's one of the most underrated ideas of the last...
I agree.
Maybe two decades.
If given the choice, I'm always going to choose D&D, but I respect what they've done.
Rant over.
Random. Yeah, and I think, when you're talking about these flavors or genres or moods, once again, you've probably been talking, if you're playing with a group of friends that you've probably talked about this for a while, and you're probably all like, yeah, I'm really excited to run like an anime campaign or a dark fantasy thing. And so you probably know, like, okay, my players are really stoked on playing a Spelljammer campaign, so I can skip this step. But I think this is an important thing because once you establish like a flavor genre or mood the players are actually like kind of interested in.
It's like Spelljammer, but Jules Verne style.
Yeah, and it just, it's a quick description. It doesn't have to be a lot. Just enough for a player to be like, yes, I like that, or no, it sounds terrible.
Think of it like you're on Netflix and you're reading the description of the movie or TV series that you want to watch.
It's funny because like we commit to watching entire seasons of shows, and we have trailers and like entire hours for movies. But for D&D, we're like, yeah, whatever, DM, I trust you. Like I just want to play this fucking game.
Entertain me, bro.
Like, it's better be good, Like,
whereas we're like, Iron Fist, I hate it, but I'm gonna watch as much of it as I can stomach.
Yeah, exactly, right? Don't get me started on that. That's a whole episode in itself.
Oh.
But I think once you've kind of like seen what people pick up on in terms of your premise or your flavor or genre or mood, you get into the actual setting. And I think one of the biggest things when you choose a setting is how important is the setting to your campaign in the first place? Because I know you and I have played entire non-setting campaigns.
I think it's a really good insight.
Right? Because sometimes the best there's a setting in Dungeons & Dragons that's unspoken. It's this high fantasy Dungeons & Dragons. Now it's kind of Forgotten Realms almost. But like, if you open the book and you don't specify a setting, it doesn't matter because it all exists within this universe.
It didn't used to have one. They eventually had to...
Non-setting was the thing.
Because of marketing and branding, they had to call that in different editions one of either Greyhawk or Mystara.
Right?
The two are not the same, except when they are.
Except, yeah, and then you're like, oh, we got Ravenloft over here. Like, it just, like...
That's its own can of worms, man. Having run a few Ravenloft games, I will tell you, they never turn out the way you expect.
Oh, no, you think, like, I've run this one before, but no. Well, when you have a good villain, though, things can...
Is Strahd a good villain, though? I mean, like, he's a well-equipped
That's
villain.
a good debate,
I'm not sure that he is.
That could be a great debate that we will have to have at some point, because you could make a case for either side, I think.
I mean...
Yeah. Anyway... I think that's exactly why it's important to kind of... How important is the setting to your campaign? Because if you're playing in Curse of Strahd, oh my god, the setting of the campaign is everything. But if you and I are picking up Sunless Citadel and we're just going to sit down and like start playing these adventures and kind of just linking them up, there's no setting there.
It doesn't matter.
The setting does not matter outside of like, the Yawning Portal. Players only care about what is around them. It's like video games. Like... Most of the time, that shit's not rendered until it comes on screen or you get close to it.
That's true.
Right? It's like a rendering distance. Your players are like characters in a game. Like, they only care about what they can fucking see, what is rendered around them. Most of the time, unless you're playing a really political game with big factions, then you zoom out every now and then to that, like, bird's eye view, they don't care. They're like, what's in this tavern that I'm in? Like,
I think there's a whole thing, and Robin Laws has talked about this quite extensively. He's written about different... how to capture the macro level for a game and the movers and shakers while also the micro level, the tactical. And I think there was one series of blog posts he wrote where the players had two different characters they would play, each one. One was like, I think it was a sci-fi one. They had like a space marine character, and another one was the politician as part of the board who would
like
decide... Yes, who would decide what the space marines did next.
I've seen that.
And so it's like politics and then also fight.
Yeah, I've seen really cool games run like that, especially now with streaming. Like, I've seen a game that Adam Coble runs where all the people watching are members of the factions in the game. And so he'll run a faction session, which is
neat.
It's kind of cool, right? Because he is able to give all of the viewers something to do that doesn't, like, they're not jumping in and breaking the game with weird suggestions. And it's cool because all of these people can be like, I'm in this faction, this is my team, and they will take a turn, in the game essentially, where they all decide what they're going to do, and then that affects what happens in the game world to all these characters, which I think is a really cool way to do it. Like, if you're going to use streaming and give your audience agency, I think that's a fantastic way to do it.
I totally agree.
That's brilliant. Fucking brilliant.
I think one of the best ways I've seen in recent times, and I go back and forth about this, I've done both of them, but I think one of the best ways I've seen to handle a session zero, and actually your Sunday game has this quite excellently, which is to hand a player primer out to the players.
Except don't make it 50 pages like I did, because no one's going to fucking read it.
I mean, I've definitely made like 50-plus page packets. I'm like, here's our campaign packet.
For anyone listening, the tip to a good campaign primer is brevity.
I think that one, maybe 2 sheets. Like in my mind,
one is best.
The ideal player primer.
People might read it if you hand them one sheet.
A dual-sided,
Yeah. Oh,
sheet,
there you go.
One sheet,
Still
boom,
one
boom.
piece of paper.
But see, the tough part is you have to
intimidated
cover
staple.
like style and theme and tone and setting, and then also all your homebrew mechanics, right? Like, we're going to use feats. We're going to do this particular, and that's a lot.
And it starts to grow.
So maybe I'll revise it and say that I think the ideal player primer is, and this is just my opinion, but like, all right, let's say 2 pages, front and back of both, so 4 total, and 1 and 2 are, here's the setting and the characters. Setting, characters. And then number 3 maybe is homebrew rules, and number 4 is wildcard. You get it.
Totally, yeah.
Something like that.
I think like keeping it short is the trick. But before you even, I think the thing sometimes though is that player primer, you may not be able to throw that together until the end of the session, or you may need to send it to, now it's nice because you can just send it to people online like I did. You really have to get that information gathering first before you can create a solid player primer, I think, because you may come in with something you really want to run and all your players are like, yeah, I don't like Eberron. I don't want to run in that camp. I don't want to do that. I'm not interested in that at all.
It's
so
point.
you might be back to the drawing board. So I think depending on how far you get in that session 0, it might be something that you do afterwards with the information that you've gathered.
All right, so you were talking about character creation earlier, and there were a few specific things that you think were valuable. Tell me about that.
So one of the, I think, obviously, we're talking about setting. The whole point of the setting is to give your players enough that they can make characters in that setting and like buy into it a little bit. So what you choose to allow like in your game as a DM has a big effect, right? Like if you are running like a dark fantasy, like low magic setting, and someone's like, I just want to be a wizard with a wand, it may not work out quite as well.
I would like to be a unicorn that got turned into a person and has fairy powers.
Exactly.
Not going to fly in your Warhammer Dark Fantasy.
Right, and so you got to think about also complexity. Like, what sources are you allowing? Because if you allow homebrew here, it may create complexities with this. So I find oftentimes it's almost better to give players like, hey, because I've tried the use anything you want. Here's a library of things approach, and I've used the just use the player handbook approach. And what I find is best is almost, especially if you're homebrewing your own campaign, is to curate a few things which you think work really well, and that way you can present your players like, choose your options from these. If there's something else you really, really want, I'm sure we can make it work. But if you could pick from these, it'll be more rewarding because it will fit into what we're doing better.
I really like to do that in the player primer, and what that looks like.
Totally.
Remember we talked about earlier, it's like, in my ideal, it's like 4 pages, 2 pieces of paper. So I'll look at it as, I think a good shorthand is, what are the class/archetypes that players are allowed to be? So, if I want barbarians in my steampunk setting, but I want them to be juggernauts of battle, I'll rename it. And I'll say, let's just call it Berserker or Juggernaut or something like that. A war fiend, maybe. And then I give a 1 or 2 sentence description of what that is. In bold, war fiend. This is a character who has a deep understanding of the blood of battle. They are the rock, the tank at the center of any grand melee. And that's it.
I think that's great. I think that really works for a player primer. It keeps it short, and you can do that for races or classes. Because like in some settings, it's like, oh, you're a gnome. Gnomes are like a slave race to this, to mind flayers in this world.
I mean, 4th edition tieflings were slaves, all
right,
of them, right?
Right. So it's one of those things. I think like whether it's class or race, it's kind of nice. Like sometimes I'm like, oh man, I don't want my dragonborn to be like that, but it really helps create, especially if you're doing a more political game or a game where those world interactions and politics matter. Like if dwarves are a bunch of slavers and everyone hates them, that really affects like what you're going to do with a dwarf character. So I think like outside of like just what books are you going to allow, you got to think about like the in-game politics and the factions a little bit. And I think that's definitely the perfect thing to put on a player primer. Because it's like, hey, heads up, in this world, tieflings are X. Or if you chose this, that's cool. But like, by the way, magic hasn't existed for thousands of years, and you are literally the first people to cast magic in thousands of years, right? That's a different,
let's say you're playing a game in the Skyrim setting, the Elder Scrolls setting, and some player shows up and is like, so I'd like to be a dwarf, kind of like Gimli. Well, guess what? In that setting,
it doesn't exist.
The dwarves aren't around. There's none of them, you know?
They don't live there.
It's a perfect kind of thing you would want to be able
Exactly, and you want your player to know that so then they don't show up with this like huge character idea. I think something that helps when you're talking about character creation is to tell your players, come up with 2 or 3 ideas that you like.
I totally agree.
Not because their one might not work, but because when people have one idea, they get so attached to it. Yeah. And I've done this, and you've done this many times as players, I'm sure. Yeah. But when you're like, hey, come up with your top 3, and then once, we're sitting down and really looking at what fits best, and you could maybe, 2 other people want to play a cleric. So you're like, well, which never happens. You always wish somebody played a cleric.
Someday I think it'll be hilarious to have a party full of clerics.
Oh, and they'll all just be arguing about whose religion is best. It'll be great. But I would love to play in that game.
It'll be too much like reality.
Yeah, that might be too real. That might be too real. I would love to play in that game, though. Can't say the other players would like to have me. Because it depends on what god you choose. Some might be more popular than others. But I think that's like, you got to set that up. And the whole goal is really just to make sure the characters are somehow connected to the world and each other. Because like we said earlier, it's not the GM's job to give your character a reason to be an adventurer. Mm-hmm. Like there's this unspoken contract of, hey, we're sitting down to play a game called Dungeons & Dragons where we pretend to be a band of adventurers. Now, there might be some stipulations, like maybe we're evil adventurers, or maybe we're all goblins, whatever. There's this unspoken contract of we're sitting down to play this game together. If you want to make the edgelord, lone, dark ranger character who doesn't want to talk to anyone and is just struggling with his own darkness. Yeah, essentially Batman. Yeah, you could do that, but what reason is that character to hang out with the party? You gotta that's your job as a player.
We all show up as players to contribute.
That's the player's job. Yes. It's not the GM's job to give you a reason. And then they're like, oh, I'm just playing my character. And I'm like, well, do you ever consider you made
it? It's not an effective answer. That's a cop-out.
Do you ever think
bullshit.
Maybe you made a shitty character for this situation? How about, you're playing your character and it fucking sucks.
Yeah, you're just playing your character and I'm just doing my job as the DM. I'm going to kill your character. I'm going to make you roll up another one. Yeah. Oh, you did the same thing? I'm going to kill that one too. Man, I wish we had talked about
the group kills you this time. I don't have to worry about it. And this is where Session Zero comes in to be useful because you can sometimes avoid this shit.
Exactly.
I think that's really the goal of going through the pitching of the flavor and figuring out what setting people like so that you can really just give them enough to buy in with a character. Because once you're bought in, you don't even have to worry about getting them to buy into your main plot line yet. It's really more of that world, and does that world appeal to them? The plot, you could deal with that later. You could tell most stories pretty well through D&D. Certain stories I personally think there's other games better suited to, in some cases, just due to the mechanics, just mechanical limitations. Yeah. You could do it in Dungeons & Dragons. You would just use so much homebrew and altering of rules that it might not look like Dungeons & Dragons.
It requires more work than others.
Right? I know you and I are both big fans of things like Matt Colville's Stronghold and Followers rules because we remember when you used to get a keep and where's my keep? Why'd you take that away from me?
I'm a fighter. I'm level 9. I get a keep.
So I think for character creation, you really have to make sure that there's some buy-in. And the more you can get people to connect their characters, the better, because it makes your job easier.
I agree.
And I think the biggest tip, when it comes to character creation as a DM, especially if you're a new DM, is don't be afraid to say no. Now, you may use the no, but you can do this, but you can make it this way. Don't be afraid to say no. Because like we said at the start, a Session Zero is not a checklist to make everybody happy and on the same page, because any person in any campaign can name one thing about that campaign they don't like. You're not going to like everything.
Welcome to reality.
Players who like role-playing aren't going to be happy if there's too much combat. It's just, unless it's really well-run combat, which you can do. It just depends. So I think not being afraid to say no is really important, especially if it's a new player or you're just setting expectations is, hey, sometimes the DM's going to say no. And sometimes with a new DM, you're afraid to do that because you think, hey, I might ruin their player experience.
You want to succeed.
But really, the thing is, in the long term, if you say no, they might have a better player experience because they've created a character more suited to have fun in that campaign that you're running and designing.
This is why I like no but better than yes and.
Same.
I think that no but allows the DM to be like, no, but here's this complicated twist that gives you some of what you want, but also allows me to spin it in a way that suits either other player need or my own need.
It also feels, at least for me, it feels more collaborative almost.
Yeah.
Because it's yes, I see that, and this is how it's I think it's important.
I mean, one of the most obvious ways I think to do it, just because it's like, well, what does a no butt look like? Is I want to have magic armor. Or I want to be
Iron Man.
Prince. Can I be Iron Man? Yeah, that's a great example. Can I be Iron Man in this Forgotten Realms setting? And the DM might say, no, but you've heard of a suit of armor that a grand person made and got destroyed and made some schematics. And you are confident that if you were able to find that schematic, you could build it yourself.
Perfect. And the player likes that. You just wrote part of their backstory for them, and
now
you're both going.
You just built yourself the opportunity for a whole slew of adventures based on, no, you don't get to be Iron Man to start. You get to be Tony Stark who finds Iron Man in your story.
Exactly. I think that's a great way to do it because sometimes just having that conversation creates plot points for you. And you get and a lot of the time you go, oh, so this is what that character wants. The player wants out of this game. And I think that's really important. And we'll talk about that in the future, but I think so much the game itself and the experience comes down to why is that person sitting at the table? Like, we focus so much on how they interact with the game a lot of the time that we miss, like, okay, this is how this player is interacting with this game. Why? What is driving these actions? Why do they gravitate to combat? Or why do they gravitate more to storytelling? And, like, what are they getting out of this experience? I think that tells you, looking at that why instead of just the how in isolation, really gives you more ways to know what your player wants and, like, make sure they have fun.
Which I think is really the most important thing about a session zero. And this is one of the other things that I like to say explicitly at a session zero. And I think this is the area in which I always end a session zero if I can, which is, let's all remember, with all the players, sit down and we've all made characters. We're all going to start maybe just before we kick off if we get to role play or whatever. But I like to say this explicitly. Let's all remember that everybody is here to have fun.
I have to say, you are really good at that. I think in every game I've played where you started the game, you've made a point of saying that, and it seems like a little thing, but I think it's really big.
Momentous.
Especially,
it's a big piece.
It's a big piece. I think especially for people who only maybe played when they were younger and dealt with a lot of murder hoboing or just like players.
Or they like the puzzle solving, or they like the challenge of combat, and that's a puzzle, or they get really into this is a common pitfall. My character would do this, but my character would do that, whatever it is. And I always just like to come back, look, this is a game. Capital G, game. We are all here to play, capital P, play, and have fun.
So make it work.
Whatever that looks like for us. And ideally, it's going to be collaborative, so it's not competitive, right? My fun should never squash some other's.
That's one of the best things about Dungeons & Dragons. It's not straight up competitive.
Right.
It gives you that, like you said, cooperative play that people go to video games for on another level.
Yeah. One of the things I think that's really important to do if you're going to do a session zero, and it's really easy to be like, hey, let's have a session zero and get together with your players and roll up characters and talk about all this stuff and then go home. And that's the wrong thing to do, in my opinion. I think the most important thing about a session zero is that you have to actually play. That's really where the rubber meets the road.
Really?
I think
session zero for you requires some kind of play.
I think that at the end of it, in my mind, a successful session zero consists of, we talk about the setting, we talk about the table and the rules, we talk about our characters, and then we start playing. And ideally, we've been able to, if I'm doing my job as a DM, I've made it so that in, let's say, a 4-hour period, whatever the time slot is we have, we've been able to start all and get enough of all of those things done that we can actually have an example of what it's going to feel like. Because I think that that's the most important part that you can take away from a session zero and give to the player.
How does that group gel?
You can have them make a character. You can have them agree with you in session zero about theme, about setting, about all that stuff. And they show up and they do something completely different because their interpretation is not the same as what you had. And so I think that in that moment, the real where the rubber meets the road is, we rolled up some parts of our character. Maybe it's only just we have our stats and our name, whatever it is, and then we start playing.
I think if you can get to play in that session zero, it's a magical thing. Like, it's awesome because if you can get to the point where your character, you allow them to step into the characters and maybe meet each other and create that group buy-in. Why are you guys adventuring together? Like, if you can get that and start to build that, like, team cohesion group at the start, that's awesome.
And if you can end that, whatever that micro session
Yeah,
is,
it can be like
at
just
the
role
very
play.
end,
Like, you don't even need to roll comp. Like,
With
maybe
some-
you never roll for initiative.
just give it some setup.
But you probably start in a tavern. There's probably a brawl at some point. So
right,
you
leave it
know,
on with some
you know.
cliffhanger. It doesn't need to be super
Like,
dramatic.
if we play and there's no combat, I'm the player that's going to be like, but I want to roll attacks.
Right. But I want to use these powers.
I have these cool powers.
I just built this character.
I could drink in real life. I didn't come here to play a dwarf who just gets drunk in a tavern.
But I think that part of it is like the role play has to happen. That's maybe one of the most important things. Some version of it, and in an ideal sense, this is just again now we're in Skylar's fantasy.
Yeah.
It has to.
I'll tell you about mine in a second. Don't worry.
It has to. It should. It should not resolve. It should end. It doesn't have to be like a dramatic cliffhanger. It just needs to be. You ask him, well, can you show me the key? And then the DM's, I'm talking to the bartender. I wonder where the key is that he has to that chest that he guaranteed that he would be able to, whatever the plot hook thing is. And then you end it there before they get the answer. Just unresolved so that
You
there's
have
that.
to leave them wanting more.
Exactly.
That's like the goal. Like, if you can do that, you're doing great.
Set the hook and bait it.
So I think that's one that's important to, like, if you considering, like, when you're setting up your session 0, how important to you is it to get some playtime in there? Now, I know from a player perspective, I want to fucking play. I want to roll initiative, and I want to do something. I want to use my cool abilities, So as a player, that's important to me. I want to get that play in there. But as a DM, I understand, like, that's a pipe dream of a session 0. If you can do it, that's great.
That's why I think it's so important, Just if you can get
For
there,
new players especially.
hold that in your mind.
Oh, man.
Try if you can, and that way they can be like, I really enjoyed this, but I think that I want that maybe a druid is too complicated for my first character. Maybe I would like instead to play something a little simpler. And I'm like, okay, fine, let's roll you a fighter.
You know what I love about druids that's so weird is back in the day, to become a better druid, you had to like fight and kill other druids.
I know.
And now they're like these tree hugger, like,
it was like Highlander. They were like Highlander before.
They were Highlander before. Now they're like, I don't use metal weapons. I don't like. Is that organic healing potion? Because I don't do conventional.
I only do free range good berries.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, God, exactly.
All right. So when do you think that you would, for you, skip a session 0?
I would skip a session 0 if we are talking about like a group of people that I've played with for a long time and I know their gaming preferences, and we've probably been talking about what campaign we want to play next for quite a while, and maybe we've even discussed specific characters we want to do, or crazy plot twists, or maybe we have an idea of like, we want to run like an anime style campaign with ridiculous like technique attacks, who knows. So that case is one where I would avoid a session 0, and then other times it's where time is limited. Or like you're at a one-shot, or you're at a convention.
Exactly, convention or one-shot.
Because sometimes like the one-shot, the setup already has done the session 0 for you.
Right.
Like you're kind of stepping into the shoes. All right, you guys, like we've done one before where it's like you start playing, you're these goblins. Go with it. Right? You have characters otherwise, but just you're stepping right in and going with it. So I think that's one time where the session 0 could be, you could ignore that.
I have in a fantasy, and this is, I think, what I work toward. I'm like, all right, I think you've seen this. Let's do a very limited game. Let's do a little bit of a longer game with the same players. Let's do an even longer game with the same players as we build trust, share our imagination
The trust is
world
important.
together over time, understand what each player is looking for, what the DM tends to feel like, so that after we've gone through this, there's this... I don't know that I actually can summon to any mind examples of it in reality. Maybe it's just a fantasy, but... that there's this moment where the next game we play, we don't need one because we know each other so well.
Ideally, yeah.
Right? It's like the ideal that I shoot for.
And you think that, and then, you're always going to have that player like, I don't want to be a halfling. Like, we're all halflings? Like,
one of the other
fuck
times,
halflings, man.
One of the times I think I would skip a session 0 is I think that there's some real merit to doing I guess you could call it a session 0 as a session 1. That doesn't really make sense, but the way that in film they refer to it is in media res, which means in the middle of things.
Totally.
So, you start in the middle of the caravan that you're on has been attacked. What do you do next? And to define the characters, this is something I learned from Fate, actually. To define the characters as you play them.
Yeah.
Which can be very powerful.
Totally. It can be really fun to learn get to know a character by playing that character. Like, hey, here's a character, step in the shoes. And I think as a DM to do that, you have to have a bunch of pre-gens ready to go.
That's an easy way to do it.
Mechanically, like, from a more narrative approach in a game, that's awesome. Like, if your players are down for that, it's
Even
great.
if you know them really well, you know?
Yeah, but you might have players, like myself, who are a little anxious about, like, I'm on the spot. Oh, no, like, I want to know more about this world before I create a character so I can, like, buy into it. What if I make a Dragonborn in there, like, some, like, slave race here, and I'm very disappointed with my choice.
I mean, yes, right?
See,
I want to feel like I have ownership over the character. But I think there's some caveats that go with that. I'm going to do in media res, right in the middle of things, start, and we're going to make characters on the fly, which probably the session 0 in this case is the DM or GM saying this at the start. We're going to start in the middle of things. You have the power to assert things as players that are true.
Yeah.
Capital T.
I think you could still create characters in advance and then still use that technique. You might easily begin the campaign.
But even say for a player who's like, I want more clearly defined things so that I don't feel so lost in this, whatever this is, then you could say, all right, well, here maybe in the fly of it, here are some things, and it's a little bit of DM prep that you can pick from.
Like a card with the races on it.
Maybe here are some of the spells that you might know.
That could be a kind of a cool way to do it, like to build that level 1 character through roleplay.
Right.
And be like, okay, pick one of these races.
Or even through, roleplay.
And more power gamers might have a problem with that, but like if you let them know, like, hey, we can always change this later, just go with it for now.
Part of it, I think, and again, this is why I call it a fantasy, because I think that there is also an ability to, you can, even for power gamers, say, all right, you want to know the stats? We can define it on the fly right now. All right, you want to have some crunch in particular? Here's a quick reference for the rules, and you want to be a big smashy thing? All right, great axe, great sword, great club, salvaged car frame? You tell me, whatever it might be, but I think in order to do that, you have to have enough player trust that they'll be like, all right,
I know my DM's not going to screw me over.
Exactly.
Like, I know they have my best interest in mind.
I know that they're going to, that even if it doesn't, even if I'm like, I don't know, I'm going to be a smashy guy, or I'm going to cast some blood magic because it seems the most interesting, that they will give me the thing that I as a player show up for.
Yeah, totally.
But that's only because we've been through it before, and like, for you, I know that you want the tactical battle stuff, right?
Yes.
Like, it's like, okay, as long as that's in there.
I don't want it, I need it.
I know that he will be satisfied.
It fills the void where my soul used to live. Victory in combat. But yeah, totally. I think like we said at the start, everything is dependent on the table you're playing at and who you're playing with. So when you know your players well, like, you can get away with doing stuff like that more. And like, I've always wanted to run a campaign where you roll for everything at the start. Like, there's a table for your race, and then you roll for your class, and sorry,
and
you just gotta fucking deal with it. If you die, you do it again, and it's just like a meat grinder, old school dungeon crawl. Like, I would love to play in a campaign like that.
Tomb of Annihilation.
Exactly. Like, throw me like in Tomb of Horrors or something, and we'll do that. That'd be fun. I can do
It's
that.
well suited for that.
Exactly, right?
I would like to play Bob 3.
It feels like a roguelike at that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like a video. Like, I'm okay with that. But you have to know that going in. I think the more you talk to your players about, hey, this could happen, or this is what we're going to do, the more they're going to be accepting of it.
Okay, I think that covers it for this session 0.
Our episode 0.
Our episode 0, that's right, for Fall Realms Radio, our podcast of many things.
Thank you for tuning in. We will have more to come.
Please don't hesitate. Share this. Tweet it. Instagram it. Facebook, tweet, Snapchatgram.
Whatever the internet things that you use,
all
share
the social
it
medias.
on those things.
Most importantly, share it at your table.
Yes. People who actually care and know what we're talking about.
Social network. All right, until next time, thank you for tuning in to Fall Realms Radio.
We'll see ya.